The SR-87 highway, stretching through the desert expanses of Arizona, had always evoked a sense of unease among locals. Not because it was particularly dangerous, accidents there were rare, but because of its remoteness, lack of lighting, and endless miles without a single turn, creating the feeling that you weren't driving on a road, but trapped in someone's dream, from which you'd never wake. It was around 2 a.m. when highway patrol officers, Sergeant Tom Johnson and his partner Officer Billy Rhodes, were slowly driving along that desolate stretch once again. They were listening to an old radio and chatting about nonsense, when suddenly a faint light appeared in the distance. It looked like a car parked on the shoulder, alone, without hazard lights or emergency signals. Just a dark vehicle, left in the dead of night, where there were no houses or cell reception. "You see that, Billy?" Tom asked, turning down the radio.
Maybe it broke down?
Billy replied with a yawn. At least something to break the boredom tonight. They slowly approached. A black sedan was neatly parked on the side of the road, but it looked as though it had been deliberately left where no one would ever pass by accident. The car was clean, gleaming, as if just washed. No visible damage. Temporary plates, tinted windows prevented them from seeing inside. "Well then, let's see who the night brought us," Tom muttered, stepping out of the car. Both officers approached the vehicle. A man was sitting inside. At first glance, nothing unusual. Dark suit, white shirt, neatly combed hair, but he was wearing sunglasses. At night, and he wasn't moving, even when the officers shone their flashlights directly in his face. "Good evening, sir," Tom said, tapping on the window. "Are you all right? You know you're parked in a no parking zone?" The man slowly turned his head. No emotion, no words. Tom tapped the window again, a little harder. Finally the glass slowly rolled down, and the man said, "Engine stalled. Waiting for help." "Do you have ID?" Billy asked, stepping closer. The man pulled out a wallet, but it was empty. No license, no credit cards. Only a few business cards with strange symbols, in a language they didn't recognize. "Sir, this is unusual. We need your name, and to verify the car's registration." The man took out a phone, an old model, no GPS, not even a touch screen, and pressed something. No sound, no screen. He just pressed a button and tucked it away again. "I'm not here to cause problems," he said. "I'll be leaving soon." His voice was incredibly calm, too calm. No fear, no anxiety, like someone who knew with absolute certainty that he was in control. "You know, like in the movies," Billy whispered to Tom, "this guy looks like a spy, or a hitman, or just someone with a weird fashion sense." Tom replied, "But it still doesn't explain why he's sitting here, in the middle of the night, wearing sunglasses, and without ID." They returned to their car to run the license plate, but the system came back with nothing. No record, no registered owner, no car. "Impossible," Tom muttered. "It's either a top-tier fake, or something much more interesting." When they returned to the man, he was sitting just as calmly, staring straight ahead. And at that moment, something clicked inside Tom. For the first time that night, he felt genuine unease. Not fear, more like a creeping sense that they had stumbled upon something far bigger than they were ever meant to understand. "Something's not right here, Billy," he whispered. "Really not right." Officers Tom Johnson and Billy Rhodes approached the stranger with a full set of suspicions and questions. The situation was escalating. A car with no registration, a person without documents, a phone, a relic from the past, and that cold, calculated calmness. Too perfect, too inhuman. So Tom began, stopping by the window. "You don't have any documents, no registration, and you're sitting in a car that officially doesn't exist. Do you understand how this looks?" The man silently nodded, as if there was nothing wrong with this. "Let's put it this way, sir," Billy intervened, crossing his arms. "If you don't identify yourself, we have the right to detain you until your identity is established. You don't want to spend the night at the station, do you?" "Is that really necessary?" the man said calmly. "Yes, damn it, it's necessary," Tom replied sharply. "This isn't an absurd theater. We're not playing spy. The tension between the parties began to hum like a high-voltage wire. Although the officers still maintained formal politeness, Billy's voice now had a hint of condescension. Maybe he's from a cult, he murmured to Tom. Or some experimental show. You know those YouTube social experiments. Like a James Bond from Walmart. Tom snickered, smiling. Both of them laughed openly. They began making up nicknames for him. Agent Zero, Mr. Matrix, Sunglasses 2024, and the man still sat silently, unmoved. And that was what annoyed them most, his indifference, as if the entire situation was just a minor obstacle in his grand plan. Do you seriously think that kind of behavior will help? He asked dryly, looking at Billy through his sunglasses. Do you seriously think we'll ignore this? Billy shot back. All right, enough playing. Get out of the car. Slowly. The man didn't move. Did you hear me? I'm waiting. For what, damn it? For orders. Tom grabbed his radio. Center. This is Johnson. We have a suspicious subject without documents. Suspicious vehicle. Requesting a check through extended databases. Possible agency or federal service. I repeat. Looks classified. The radio crackled for a few seconds. Then came a brief reply. Acknowledged. Sending request. Time seemed to slow down. The darkness around them grew heavier, as if an additional shadow had fallen over the road. Suddenly the man slowly turned to Tom. If you don't stop, this will be your official misconduct. Yeah, maybe even an international incident. Billy laughed. Who are you? Jason Bourne. I'll say one thing, the stranger quietly said. You don't want to know who I am. These words were spoken without threat, just a statement of fact, like someone who knows time will put everything in its place. This is too much, Tom said, pulling out handcuffs. Get out. Last warning. And the man got out, slowly, calmly, as if heading for dinner. His movements were incredibly precise, calculated. No panic, no resistance. He simply raised his hands, walking towards the handcuffs. The officers, still mocking, moved closer, and at that moment, the radio crackled sharply. Johnson, Rhodes, stop immediately. I repeat, stop the detention immediately. High-level agent identified. Full immunity. I repeat, do not touch. Suddenly, like thunder in the night, the atmosphere changed. The officers froze. The silence around seemed to have been vacuumed out. What? Billy whispered. Full immunity. Tom slowly asked, not believing what he'd heard. The man silently watched them, and for the first time, a slight smile. Small, barely noticeable, but enough to freeze the blood. I told you, I'm not here to cause trouble. The stranger's small smile disappeared as quickly as it appeared. He silently raised his hands, giving the officers a choice. Obey the radio order or cross a line that could cost them their careers, and possibly their lives. Tom and Billy exchanged glances. For the first time that night, there was no anger or mockery in their eyes, but doubt. Then, fear. Full immunity, Billy whispered again, but this time with genuine concern. Step back from him, Tom said quietly, taking a step back. His hands slowly lowered from the handcuffs. The stranger cautiously lowered his hands, as if there were no threat. It was as if they had all known each other for a long time. Then he pulled out a small black wallet, thin, without any logos. He opened it, and the officers saw something they weren't expecting, an ID. Not just any ID, but one with a holographic stamp shimmering in 3 languages, English, Spanish, and a language they couldn't even recognize. The ID read, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Clearance Level, Black Shadow, Active Operation, Classified, Name Jonathan Creed, Status, Agent on Duty, and beside it, a small photo, the same man, wearing glasses, with that same cold stare. Tom took a step back, his breath suddenly short. I'm sorry, Agent Creed, we didn't know. You weren't supposed to, Creed answered calmly. That's your job. Doubts, checks, reactions to an unusual situation, all by the protocol. But, there are things you're not meant to know. What level of access is that? Billy asked, trying not to look the agent in the eyes. The one your commanders haven't heard of. The officers fell silent, and Creed slowly walked toward his car, stopped by the door, and turned. You've interfered with an operation that may save, or destroy, several lives. Tonight is a knot on which thin threads are tied. Did we ruin everything? Tom cautiously asked. Not yet, but you were very close. Then another signal came through the radio. Johnson, Rhodes, special message for the agency, per federal coordinator's order. A helicopter is on its way. Expect evacuation of Black Shadow object. Repeat, Black Shadow. A helicopter. Billy didn't believe it. Here, in the sky, something hummed. A low, almost underground sound. And indeed, in a few minutes, a black helicopter appeared above the highway with no identifying marks. It hovered in the air, and a platform descended from it, without people, without voices, just a flashing red light. Creed glanced at them one last time. You've done your part, officers. Now let me do mine. And he stepped onto the platform. But just as he did, a sound stopped him again, not mechanical, not human. It was a short, sharp signal from his wrist device. Creed stopped. He opened the cover on his wrist. Beneath it was a tiny screen, blinking with a red message. Target approaching. Plan change. Activates. IREN code. The officers exchanged glances. They hadn't seen this before. Creed turned back to them, but this time his gaze held no calm, only determination. Stay here. If you see a black SUV, don't approach, don't speak, just step away, and, forget you ever met me. He made a quick motion. Something seemed to flicker in his fingers. Perhaps it was a microweapon, maybe a transmitter, or something worse. Tom and Billy silently nodded, not because they believed him, but because their instincts told them he wasn't joking. This was about more than a special operation. This was about something bigger. The helicopter immediately ascended into the sky, and disappeared into the night silence in a few seconds. And on the road, there were only two policemen, in complete silence, with thoughts that would never be the same again. Did you record all this on camera? Billy whispered. Forget it, Tom replied. Some things are better left in memory, if we even remember them at all. A few minutes after the helicopter disappeared, the empty night highway sank back into its usual silence. Tom and Billy stood there, stunned, their minds swirling with questions. Who was that man? What was the siren code? And most importantly, why did they feel like they had just stepped into something they would neither be able to explain nor forget? But the calm didn't last long. In the distance, over a hill, headlights appeared, not flickering like a patrol car, but steady. A black SUV, glossy, and with tinted windows, sped toward them. It didn't stop as it passed, but both cops noticed a woman with glasses, holding a phone to her ear, behind the wheel, and beside her, sat a burly man in a gray coat, staring at them with the same cold professional gaze as Creed. He said not to get closer, whispered Tom. It's them. The target. The SUV disappeared in the same direction the helicopter had gone, and a moment later, a powerful explosion shattered the silence. A fireball appeared on the horizon, shaking the earth. Billy collapsed to the ground. What was that? His voice trembled. The radio in the patrol car crackled to life, but instead of the usual voices, there was only digital noise, followed by a short encrypted signal, then silence, and then siren code, activated. All independent observers under review, return not expected. What the hell? Tom muttered. Independent observers, is that us? Is this about us? They began to realize, they hadn't just witnessed an operation, they had crossed a line beyond which nothing would be the same. The officers were still sitting in the car, when the service phone rang. The screen didn't show a number, only secure line. Tom hesitated, but pressed answer. Thomas Virgil, a voice said calmly from the other end. It was incredibly composed, like a news anchor, but something in it sent a chill down his spine. You and your partner have just been identified as potential obstacles in a federal case. Therefore, what? Who is this? Are you from the FBI? Tom shouted. but the voice ignored him. Therefore, fragments of the events from the last 4 hours will be erased from your memory. This is necessary for national security. You will be taken to an isolated location for a 12-hour quarantine. Provide coordinates. You will be picked up without resistance. Recess? Are you kidding me? A drone is already above you. Do not leave the vehicle. Tom jumped out of the car and looked up. Indeed, a nearly invisible drone was hovering silently above them. At that moment, Billy noticed something again on the tablet that Creed had left behind. All the data had been erased, except for one video file that began to play on its own. On the screen was surveillance footage, people in white, tables, masks, cameras, a person on the table. They were screaming, but there was no sound. Only one phrase appeared at the top. This isn't just weaponry. This is control. Then the screen went black, and the tablet melted in his hands. This isn't a special operation, Tom. This is something else. They're testing something on people. Billy was as pale as paper, and then their phones turned off. The cars wouldn't start. Half an hour later, an unmarked van pulled up. 2 masked figures silently took them away, and at the spot where Creed had stood, there remained a trace of something that looked like a burnt cross in the metal, like a symbol, like a seal. The next day, local news reported an explosion at a gas reservoir in a desert zone outside the city. The version was quickly pulled from the air. An hour later, a news story emerged. Military exercises, planned explosions, no casualties. But Tom and Billy knew the truth. By morning, 3 men in black suits, without any IDs or names, arrived at their precinct. One, an older man with noticeable scars on his fingers, simply said, "You saw something you weren't supposed to. It will stay between us forever." They didn't threaten, they just made it clear that fabricated stories about an agent could disappear along with the people who told them. Later, Tom learned from a leak in an old database that Jonathan Creed was indeed listed in the FBI files, marked deceased in action, 2003. He had died during a mission, so it couldn't have been him. They stopped? Or maybe it could, if he had never been in the system. And that was what terrified him the most. 2 days passed. Tom and Billy returned to duty, or so they thought. But something was off. Their memories of the events were erased, not entirely, just fragments. They remembered the man in the coat, the cocky smile, but his face was blurred. The events felt like a fog. The only thing that troubled them both was the feeling that they had touched something they weren't meant to see. Meanwhile, in a government center, in a large glass hall where the walls seemed like screens, the man they knew as Creed stood before a group of suited individuals. "The task is complete. The leak has been neutralized. The experiment went as planned," he said, tapping a tablet. "What about the cops?" one of the women asked without looking up from her documents. "Their memory has been partially wiped. Level 3 forget protocol activated. They pose no threat, but one of them seems to be suspecting something." On the screen behind him, a camera in the police office showed Billy sitting at a desk, looking at a blurry screenshot of the self-destructing video. The text, barely visible, said, "This is control. If necessary, clean up." Someone in the room whispered, "No, for now observe." Agent Creed nodded, and turned. There were no emotions in his eyes, but as soon as he was in the hallway, his face shifted, an imperceptible mix of exhaustion, guilt, and inner conflict. Meanwhile, in a regular police station, Tom watched his partner. Billy had started to grow quieter, locking himself in rooms, writing and drawing diagrams. Tom feared his friend was losing his mind, but even more, he feared that Billy might be right. "Remember that tablet?" Billy suddenly asked. "I don't remember anything. They said it was a gas leak, explosion, amnesia. That's it. Forget it." "But what if it's not? What if we really met someone who's hiding from the government, or even working for it? What if we became part of an experiment?" Tom fell silent. Then he pulled a small metal token from his pocket, the same token that had accidentally fallen from Creed's coat, and somehow ended up in his own. It had only 3 letters on it. ORB, and coordinates. I found this the next morning, but I decided not to say anything. I don't know why. But now, I want to know the truth. A few days later, they followed the coordinates, deep into the mountains where there was no phone signal, and no one around. They reached an old radio station, that should have been abandoned long ago. As soon as they approached, the gates opened by themselves. Cameras recorded their faces. Inside they were already waiting, and among them was Agent Creed, no longer in a coat or sunglasses, but for the first time, truly himself. Now that you're here, it's time to tell you who I really am, and why you were meant to learn more than you were allowed. They entered the room. It was almost entirely sterile, white walls, a screen spanning the entire space, and dozens of eyes watching them. People were sitting, no ordinary people, no police officers. These were those who controlled another level of reality. They didn't work for the state. They worked above states. Agent Creed approached. He wore a simple dark suit and an ordinary shirt, but his eyes glowed with dangerous confidence, the kind of confidence that comes from seeing things that shouldn't exist. Welcome, officers. You passed a test that 98% of people fail. You felt something that most will never experience: intuition. You didn't let go, and that's why you're here. What is all this? Billy asked, his voice firm but his heart racing. I want to know everything. Creed gestured to the room. This is Project Orbita, a top-secret initiative. We track, detect, and neutralize everything that threatens the structure of the world order. But sometimes we need more than spies. Sometimes we need intuitive, independent thinkers, those who can think outside the protocol. You're just that. You noticed me, didn't get scared, didn't bow to authority, didn't stop, even when the system tried to erase your memory. Tom and Billy exchanged a glance. What was this? An offer? A threat? A threat? And now what? Tom asked again. You have a choice. Either you join us. New names, new lives. We'll train you, give you resources, and you'll be part of a force that truly changes the world. Or, you go back, but with a complete memory wipe. No trace of you will remain, not even a shadow of doubt or a memory of today. Billy stepped forward. How can we trust you? You can't. But if you still remember what you saw that night on the road, you have no choice. Because the truth doesn't disappear. It will torment you until it destroys you. Creed pressed a button. A video appeared on the screen. The full version of the first night. What they didn't remember, Creed talking not to someone, but to a device that was receiving a signal from a satellite. He was coordinating the capture of an undercover agent, and at the moment the officers approached, a malfunction occurred. They were accidentally drawn into an operation they were only meant to observe via drones. The next morning in the precinct, silence. Only one of them sat at the desk. Tom. He was drinking coffee and staring into space. Where's Billy? Asked the young intern. On vacation, Tom answered quietly. A long one. But Tom's eyes were different now. Deeper, more alert. It seemed he saw more than he was supposed to. The camera pulls away. Outside the window, a normal city. Everything seems normal, but in the shadows a man in a coat. The same one. He's watching, smiling, and then he disappears. Thank you for watching until the end. Subscribe to the channel, leave likes, and check out other interesting stories.
It is late evening. The city streets are already empty, with only occasional car lights breaking the silence. In a wealthy suburb, a place where houses are worth millions of dollars and residents sip expensive wines on their private terraces, strangers are noticed instantly. The asphalt glistens after a recent rain. Streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalks, which seem deserted and just a bit eerie in this quiet. A black Chevrolet slowly drives along a row of luxurious houses. Behind the wheel is a black man wearing a black jacket. His face is calm, his gaze focused. He isn't looking for anyone, isn't calling out to anyone. He's simply driving straight ahead, but in places like this,
Even the mere presence of an outsider can arouse suspicion. Within minutes, flashing lights appear behind him. Red and blue beams tear through the darkness, drawing closer. The man immediately turns on his signal and slowly pulls over to the curb, carefully stopping the car. The door of the police Ford slams shut forcefully. Two officers quickly approach the car. One is tall, stocky, with a buzz cut and cold gray eyes. The other is younger, cocky, with an arrogant expression, hands on the wheel. The senior officer barks harshly as he nears the car. The man calmly places both hands on the wheel, fingers spread. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" he asks evenly. The officer ignores the question. "What are you doing here?" he demands bluntly. "I'm going home," the man replies laconically. The younger cop rudely shines a flashlight into his face and then into the car, his gaze searching for anything suspicious. "Is anyone with you?" he asks, peering into the back seat. "No, I'm alone." "Step out of the car," the senior officer orders sharply. The man sighs, rolls the window all the way down, slowly opens the door, and steps out, keeping his hands visible. The officers immediately become more aggressive. One of them grabs his hands and twists them behind his back, handcuffing him, without explanation. "What's going on?" the man repeats, a little quieter but without fear. "There have been a few burglaries around here," the senior cop snaps, "and you fit the description perfectly." "And what description is that?" the man asks, raising an eyebrow. "Black male, dark clothing, out-of-state plates." The younger cop smirks. The man glances at his license plates. They're from a neighboring state, but the car is completely legal and clean. The officers begin searching the car without a warrant. They open the glove compartment, inspect the seats, look in the trunk. They shove items around carelessly, never once offering the man a clear explanation for the stop. "Where did you get this car?" the senior officer suddenly asks sharply, exchanging glances with his partner. "I bought it," the man replies evenly. "With what money?" "Where do you work?" "In a government agency." "A government agency?" the officer repeats mockingly. "You mean like welfare? Helping those who don't work?" The younger cop laughs, shoving the man in the shoulder casually. "Listen, man, you're acting real suspicious. Wouldn't be surprised if we find something interesting in your car. Drugs, maybe a gun." The man stays silent, staring straight ahead. He knows every word could be used against him. Every movement could trigger an even harsher reaction. The officers keep rummaging. A bag with papers falls out of the trunk. The younger cop roughly opens it and pulls out documents, not caring much about their content. "What's this?" he scoffs, flipping through some printouts. "Those are official documents," the man says evenly. "Official, huh?" the cop laughs again. "Sure." While the younger cop searches the bag, the senior grabs the man's shoulder and roughly pushes him toward the patrol car. "You think we're stupid? We've seen guys like you. You're either a dealer, or working for someone." The man does not resist. He endures silently. His gaze is calm, almost indifferent, as if he knows something the cops haven't yet realized. The younger officer leans toward his partner and whispers something into his ear. The senior nods, and for a moment, it seems like the situation is about to get even more dangerous. "We can find a bag of weed on you, buddy," the younger cop says quietly, exchanging glances with his partner. The man slowly raises his gaze and looks straight into the senior officer's eyes. There is no fear in his look, only deep, cold confidence. A moment of silence, tense as a stretched wire, and right at that moment, a black SUV with tinted windows appears on the road behind them. The black SUV that appeared on the horizon slowly approaches, but the officers pay no attention to it. They are fully focused on the man standing by the patrol car with handcuffs on his wrists. The senior cop, Officer Brenner, crosses his arms over his chest, his gaze cold and predatory. The younger one, Officer Stevens, shifts nervously from foot to foot, barely concealing his excitement. There's a particular gleam in his eyes, the kind often seen in those who enjoy having control over others. Brenner steps closer. "Tell me the truth, damn it. What are you doing here? Who are you waiting for?" The man remains silent. His face stays impassive. He does not react to the provocation, does not lower his eyes. His calm only irritates the officers more. You deaf or what? Brenner suddenly grabs him by the collar and yanks him forward. Almost simultaneously, Stevens approaches from the other side, and without restraint, punches the man hard in the stomach. The blow is precise and strong. The man inhales sharply, bending slightly forward, but does not fall. He does not even groan. You son of a bitch, Stevens hisses, sweeping his leg and knocking the man off balance. He drops to his knees, then to the ground. The handcuffs prevent him from breaking the fall. His chin slams painfully against the asphalt. Brenner approaches, and without ceremony, drives his knee into the man's back, pinning him to the ground. You're going to tell me who sent you here. Otherwise, I'll make sure you face serious charges. Got it. The man says nothing. His face presses against the cold, wet asphalt. There's a scrape on his chin, from which a thin trickle of blood runs down. He does not resist. He does not beg for mercy. He simply waits. Meanwhile, Stevens pulls a small bag, with green substance from his pocket. Look what we've got here, he says with a slow spreading grin. I think I'll find this in your glove compartment. Drugs serious offense, especially if we say you resisted arrest. Brenner grunts, keeping his knee on the man's back. He leans down and speaks quietly. You know what, buddy? We're being nice. We could say you attacked us, and no one would believe you. Not here. Not in this neighborhood. His words dissolve heavily into the night's silence. The camera lingers on the man's face. It is calm, even indifferent. No sign of fear, no trace of panic, only stubbornness, and some enigmatic confidence. Stevens starts rummaging in the patrol car's trunk. From there he pulls out another item, this time a small handgun. We can say he had an illegal weapon, and what's even more interesting, that this weapon was recently used in a homicide case. That would make you suspect number one. Brenner finally stands up and removes his knee from the man's back. He roughly hauls him to his feet, gripping him tightly to prevent any chance of escape. You're screwed, man. He whispers straight into his face. This is the end for you. As viewers by this moment, we clearly understand this is a classic story of police abuse. Painfully familiar. Most of us have already seen similar footage in the news. Unjustified stops, abuse of power, planted evidence. We feel the injustice. Anger rises. The officers have completely lost control. They are now acting not according to the law, but driven by their instincts and authority. At this stage the viewer is convinced the man is yet another victim of the system. No one will help him. Stevens places both the bag of marijuana and the gun on the hood of the patrol car. Then he turns back to the man. Okay buddy, he says, winking at Brenner. You didn't want to cooperate. We'll do this our way. Others will be here soon, and I'll make sure you spend the next few years in prison. If you're lucky, not for life. The senior cop lifts the radio. Central, this is Patrol 12. We have a suspect with narcotics and an illegal firearm, requesting backup. No response from the radio yet. Brenner turns his head and notices that the black SUV has already stopped nearby. The doors begin to open, but the cops are too busy with their works to pay any attention to it. The door of the black SUV opens smoothly. First, a broad-shouldered man in a dark suit, with no visible insignia, steps out. His movements are calm and precise. He closes the door and pauses, surveying the scene. Two more men follow him. Both are dressed similarly. Sharp suits, short haircuts, alert, cold gazes. They don't fidget or hurry. Their appearance immediately suggests they are not ordinary passers-by. Brenner and Stevens are still absorbed in their staged setup. They don't notice the three strangers confidently walking toward them. Finally, Stevens glances sideways and freezes. His smile fades from his face. Brenner, he says, hoarsely. The senior cop turns around, frowning, not understanding who these men are. The first man, clearly the leader, steps closer. His face is stone-like. Slowly, he pulls a leather wallet from his pocket and flips it open in front of the officers. Inside is an FBI agent badge. The photo shows a familiar face. The very same black man they had just beaten and humiliated. Agent Devin Mills. The man from the SUV says calmly, We're conducting an internal investigation. You've just violated several federal laws. Stevens darts his eyes from the badge to the man they had just pinned to the asphalt. He freezes, his face goes pale. This wasn't just a suspicious guy. This was an undercover FBI agent. Brenner abruptly steps back, a deep frown creasing his face. This is a mistake. We didn't know, he starts, his voice suddenly dry and hollow. Agent Mills, the man they had beaten, slowly rises from the ground. He doesn't even wipe the blood from his chin. He stands tall, looking directly into the eyes of both cops. We've been observing you for several months, says one of the agents who had stayed by the SUV. His voice is calm, emotionless. Internal Affairs received multiple complaints about your conduct: illegal searches, extortion, planted evidence, racial profiling. The other agent walks over to the patrol car's hood, picks up the small bag, and the gun Stevens had just tried to plant, and places them into a clear evidence bag. It's all on video. We recorded everything, the agent says. You'd better put your weapons down and lie on the ground immediately. Brenner and Stevens freeze. They realize there's no point in resisting any longer. It's over. Brenner slowly places his gun on the ground and raises his hands. Stevens, ghostly pale, does the same. They are forced face down onto the asphalt and handcuffed. At that moment, the camera lingers again on Agent Mills's face. It is calm. No triumph, no vengeance, just a deep restrained weariness, the kind you see in someone who has waited far too long for this moment. For the viewer, this is a moment of catharsis. We realize we were wrong to think this was just another story of a victim. This time, the victim was not powerless. He was far more formidable than we imagined. He wasn't just a man who happened to fall into the cops' hands. He was an agent who had risked himself for months to expose cops like these. But the scene doesn't end here. Another black car arrives. From it step officers in uniform, members of the Internal Affairs Division. They begin documenting the arrest of Brenner and Stevens. Mills walks over to the SUV, opens the door, and takes out a phone. The targets have been neutralized, he says into the receiver. We're handing the case over to the prosecutor's office. Finally, he turns back and casts a glance at the cops lying on the ground. He says nothing, but that look speaks more than any words ever could. Several months have passed. Sunlight filters through the tall windows of the old courthouse. The only sounds in the hall are the rustling of papers and the soft echo of footsteps. The camera slowly moves across the room. Long benches, dark wood, high ceilings. Everything radiates a solemnity and the weight of the law. On the defendant's bench are Brenner and Stevens. They are no longer the confident cops we saw in the first scene. Dressed in gray suits, clean-shaven, without weapons or badges. Now they are just ordinary defendants. Their eyes are downcast, their faces weary. Their lawyers bustle nearby, but it's clear things aren't looking good. On the witness stand is Agent Devin Mills. He sits straight, calm. He wears a simple suit, his face as focused as always. But now there's also a sense of duty fulfilled. The prosecutor, a young energetic woman, speaks confidently to the jury. The defendants, abusing their official position, systematically violated citizens' rights. They planted evidence, intimidated, and used violence without cause. Thanks to a joint operation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Affairs Division, these crimes have been documented. We have video recordings, audio, and testimonies from the victims. The camera briefly cuts to the screen in the courtroom. It shows snippets from the recordings, hidden cameras capturing Brenner and Stevens stopping others, frisking them, beating them, planting drugs. But most importantly, the prosecutor continues, they chose their victims based on skin color. This is not just an abuse of power, this is systematic racial persecution. The courtroom falls silent. Brenner swallows. Stevens clenches his fists nervously. Next, other victims take the stand. A man in his 50s with gray hair, a young woman, a student. They all tell similar stories.
Each one was stopped for no reason, humiliated, searched. The camera turns back to Mills. He doesn't look away. He listens to every testimony, nodding slightly. For him, this isn't just a case, it's a matter of honor. The last word goes to Mills. He approaches the podium. The room grows even quieter. I've been with the Bureau for over 15 years, he begins, and most of my time has been spent on organized crime cases. But do you know what's the scariest? The most dangerous enemy isn't the one hiding in the shadows, it's the one wearing a uniform. He pauses for a moment. We entrusted these people with the right to carry weapons and protect citizens. They betrayed that trust. They betrayed the idea of justice. His voice doesn't rise, but it's firm. The jurors have serious faces. The audience is silent. But I want everyone here to remember, he adds. This isn't a story about a war between the police and citizens. This is a story about how the system can correct itself, and how important it is to not stay silent when you see evil, even when it wears the same uniform as you. He turns and walks back to his seat. A heavy pause fills the room. Then the final scene. The judge, a dignified man with a gray beard, announces the verdict. Both defendants are found guilty on all counts: abuse of power, evidence tampering, violence, discrimination. The court sentences. He pauses. 15 years in prison for each. Stevens shifts uneasily in his seat. Brenner looks up at the ceiling, both shattered. The camera cuts back to Mills. His face remains impassive, but his eyes show a sense of relief. The final shots. He exits the courthouse into the sunlit yard. A woman and a small child greet him. The child runs to him, and he lifts them up in his arms. A smile finally appears on his face. Mills. This is not just a story about specific people, it's a story about the system, and how easily abuses become the norm, if they are not stopped. I don't believe in good or bad cops, I believe in right or wrong actions. Sometimes the system doesn't cleanse itself, and then someone has to step forward. Justice is not when the guilty are punished. Justice is when everyone knows if evil happens, someone will stop it. Black and white photos of historical figures who fought for human rights, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, appear. Then, modern photos of protests, pickets, and courtrooms. Each of us is part of the system, and each of us has a choice: to close our eyes, or to speak the truth. Silence is consent. The truth always has a voice.
Imagine a regular morning. You wake up, make coffee, kiss your child before school, and head to work. Everything as usual. You don't expect any surprises. You have no enemies. You haven't done anything wrong. But in just a few hours, your photo will appear on all local TV channels. You will be labeled a suspect in an armed robbery. Your neighbors will start avoiding you and turning away. And most importantly, you will be arrested, without evidence, without the right to choose, because someone decided that you are black. This is not a movie. This is not fiction. This is a real story that began in the summer of 2012 in a small inconspicuous town of Grayville, Georgia, a town where everyone knows each other, where life flows slowly, and news, like gossip, spreads quickly. No one expected any major events, until the alarming news came. A robbery at the supermarket in broad daylight. Surveillance cameras captured the silhouette of the robber, a woman in a hood, dark skin, about 30 years old. After that, the usual script: police, witnesses, description. Such a woman, such skin, such height. But there aren't many people in the town who match this description. And one morning, just 2 days after the robbery, the police knocked on the door of Letitia Gray, a nurse, a single mother, who was known as a kind, quiet, responsible woman. She was just getting ready for work, holding a lunchbox and her child's backpack. They didn't even give her a chance to say goodbye to her child. Handcuffs, a search, an interrogation, and accusations. She didn't understand what was happening, and most importantly, why her. She wasn't near the supermarket. She was on shift at the hospital. But no one cared. In the eyes of the investigators, she was already guilty. No DNA. No evidence. No motive. Just because she looked similar. And maybe because she wasn't white. This is a story about injustice. But not just about a mistake. This is a story about a system in which your face is already a verdict. It's a story about how easily a life can be ruined when truth doesn't matter, and prejudice is the main evidence. Letitia Gray's story is not just about one woman, it's about all of us. About the fear of being voiceless in the face of the system. About how dangerous it is to be different from everyone else. About how one day can turn your life into a nightmare. And about whether there is justice in a world where it is often sold for the color of your skin. Next, you will learn how this happened. Who betrayed? Who helped? And how far those who wanted to convict an innocent woman went. Just because she was a convenient face for headlines. Get ready, because this story will stay with you for a long time. Until the summer of 2012. Letitia Gray lived a simple but peaceful life. She was 32 years old. She was born and raised in the same town of Grayville, where she would later be accused. From an early age, she knew what hard work was. Her mother worked as a cleaner, her father was a mechanic. They didn't have much, but they always lived honestly. This was the main principle in their family. Never betray your conscience. After school, Letitia entered the medical college in a neighboring town. Studying wasn't easy. She juggled work and study, often lacked sleep but didn't give up. Her dream was simple: to become a nurse, to help people, and to give her future child what she never had: stability. Her life changed when she gave birth to a daughter, Elia. The father of the child disappeared before the birth. But Letitia didn't complain. She was used to hardships. She worked during the day, sometimes at night, to provide for her daughter. Everyone in the hospital knew her, always smiling, polite, calm. Her patients adored her. She was the one who would first take a shift when someone was feeling unwell, or stay after her shift if there wasn't enough staff. She had no criminal history. She was never involved in any conflicts. No scandals. No violations. She even followed parking rules to the millimeter. She just lived. Without luxury. Without adventures. Just lived. Her house was modest. A one-story home with a small yard where her daughter loved to play with the dog. Every Sunday they went to church. Every evening, read fairy tales. All of this could have been a story about an ordinary mother who no one would have noticed, if not for one mistake. Letitia never thought that the color of her skin could one day become a threat. In her childhood, the town of Grayville still carried the shadows of old prejudices. She was often denied jobs with the excuse that the position was already filled. In stores, security kept a closer eye on her than on others. But she didn't complain. She believed that if you worked honestly and followed the rules, there wouldn't be any problems. But life proved otherwise. As a child, Letitia often heard stories from her grandmother about how there used to be segregated schools for white and black children in their town. Her grandmother spoke of how she feared drinking from the wrong fountains and couldn't sit in the front seats of buses. Letitia believed those days were long gone. She believed her generation was free from that pain. But over the years, she began to notice that racism hadn't disappeared. It had just changed form. It became quieter, more insidious, but no less dangerous. On the day of her arrest, she was preparing her daughter for school, making sandwiches, and turning on cartoons. Everything seemed normal. Then there was a loud knock on the door. 2 officers. No explanations. Handcuffs. Her daughter crying. And the single look from a neighbor that she would never forget. Not pity but distrust. Letitia had a habit. Every evening she wrote short notes in her journal. The entries were simple: how her day went, what Aaliyah said, which patients thanked her. There were no grand words in those lines, but they showed her true nature, genuine, compassionate, alive. And when she was arrested, this journal was left on the kitchen table, open to the page where she had written, "Today I was tired, but happy." Aaliyah said, "She loves me to the moon and back." Why her? Why out of hundreds of women in the town was Letitia singled out? She asked herself this question 1,000 times. And the only answer she didn't want to admit, but which became clearer with each passing day, was she fit the description. Her colleagues at work looked at her differently. Some genuinely respected her for her diligence. Others envied the love she received from patients. But when the news of her arrest spread, even those who considered her exemplary began to doubt. What if it's true? This question hung in the air. No one spoke it aloud, but Letitia felt it, and that hurt more than the handcuffs themselves. Next we'll tell you what the investigation looked like, why it was doomed to error from the start, and who was truly interested in finding someone guilty at any cost. On the evening of June 14, 2012, in Grayville, Georgia, just a few blocks from Letitia's house, a robbery occurred at the Brookwell Mart supermarket. Someone had broken into the store's storage room, cracked the safe, and stolen $6,000, the weekly earnings. Surveillance cameras captured a blurry image of a woman of average build in a dark hoodie, entering the store just minutes before the break-in, and then quickly leaving without purchasing anything. The police arrived within half an hour. They inspected the scene and reviewed the footage. The criminal's face was almost impossible to make out. The hood completely obscured the features, but the authorities began searching for suspects immediately. And to everyone's surprise, the next morning they visited Letitia Gray's house. Her arrest occurred at 6:41 a.m. Letitia was getting her daughter ready for school. She wasn't even allowed to dress properly. She stood at the door in a bathrobe, holding a cup of tea. The police read the charges: suspicion of theft and illegal entry. They said the cameras supposedly confirmed her involvement. Letitia tried to explain that she was home with her daughter that evening, that she hadn't even been near the store. But they didn't listen. They put the handcuffs on her in front of her daughter. Aaliyah began crying, begging them not to take her mother. One of the officers sharply said, "This is not a child's matter. Move away." And in an instant, Letitia was taken from the house, leaving her shocked daughter in the care of a neighbor who was quickly called for help. No protocols were followed during the interrogation. An attorney was only called 18 hours after the arrest. At the police station, they told her she looked very much like the person in the video. Her hoodie, which she wore when she went jogging in the morning, was dark blue, just like the one in the video. That was enough. There were no witnesses, no fingerprints in the store, no DNA, but they didn't search for other suspects. Letitia fit. The public defender assigned to her was young. She had only received her license a year ago. She tried to do something, but the judge immediately rejected the bail motion. The reason was shocking: there's a risk that the suspect might flee or influence the investigation. How? They didn't explain. Letitia had lived in the town her whole life, had no criminal record, and worked legally. But in the eyes of the system, that wasn't enough. The following days were hell. Her daughter was temporarily placed with child services. Letitia was kept in a detention cell, where her cellmates were women accused of serious crimes. She couldn't sleep properly. She didn't know how her daughter Aaliyah was. She was allowed one call every 3 days. And even then, she only heard the brief voice of a social worker. "The child is safe. Don't worry." On the 4th day, she was interrogated for the second time, this time with the involvement of a detective who immediately started with the phrase, "It's better to confess, then they'll reduce your punishment." She repeated again, "I didn't do it. I was at home. Ask my daughter. Check my phone. Look at the neighbor's camera footage." But no one checked. No one wanted to find the truth. They just needed a scapegoat. In a town where 80% of the population was white, and only 8% was black, Letitia's candidacy seemed convenient. The community was divided. Some of her acquaintances began to doubt their beliefs. Others opposed her. But the worst part was that most remained silent. They neither defended nor accused her. They just remained silent. And that silence hurt the most. After a week in detention, Letitia's lawyer managed to get a partial review of the evidence. It turned out the footage from the cameras was cropped. The time on the recording didn't match the official time of the crime. A few days later, she found 2 witnesses who saw Letitia at home that evening, her neighbor and the mailman. But even then, the investigators didn't rush to drop the charges. They dragged their feet. And all this time, Letitia sat in her cell, losing trust, peace and faith and justice. The trial of Letitia Gray was scheduled for September 18, 2012, exactly 3 months after her arrest. All this time, she remained in custody. Aaliyah was placed in a foster family, and Letitia was allowed only a few brief visits behind glass. Each of these meetings ended in tears. The child asked when mom would come home. But Letitia didn't know that returning home might never happen. The trial began with formalities. The prosecution insisted on Letitia's involvement in the theft, citing the video from the camera, the similarity of her clothing, and her behavioral inconsistency during the arrest. The prosecutor emphasized that the woman didn't resist and didn't protest, implying that it meant she knew she was caught. But the whole case was based on assumptions. There were no physical evidence, no fingerprints, no traces, nothing. The only thing the prosecution had was a low-quality video, where the face of the person was barely visible, and wearing a dark hoodie, the same kind that thousands of people in Georgia could have. The defense provided testimony from the neighbor, who saw Letitia in her yard that evening, while she was hanging laundry. The mailman confirmed that he delivered the mail, and saw her through the window. The lawyer also received a printout from the mobile operator. Letitia's phone had pinged, in the area of her home, not the store, all evening. However, Judge John McClain, a conservative white man known for his tough approach to justice, was in no rush to accept the defense arguments. He even refused to admit video from the neighbor's camera, which could have proved that Letitia never left her house. The public's reaction was mixed. Part of the community, especially African Americans, began to gather for peaceful protests outside the courthouse. They held signs that read, "Justice for Letitia," and "Skin is not a crime." People were outraged that the woman was essentially being judged for her skin color. But there were others. In anonymous comments on local forums, people wrote, "She looks like a typical thief. Did she figure out how to open the safe herself?" Or simply, "Where there's smoke, there's fire." These comments hurt more than the prosecutor's words, because they revealed a deeper issue, prejudices that were deeply ingrained in the minds of part of the population. People didn't know Letitia personally, they hadn't seen the evidence, but they had already passed their verdict, simply because of her appearance. After a week of hearings, witness testimonies, and cross-examinations, the case reached its climax. The defense attorney gave her closing argument, not only defending Letitia, but also appealing to the jurors as people with conscience and heart. She said, "You can look at this woman and see a stranger, or you can look at her and see a mother, a worker, a citizen who trusted the system. Will we destroy her life just because her hoodie was dark-colored, because she has a different skin tone than most in the courtroom?" By that time, the case had already started to make headlines in national media. CNN aired a short segment, highlighting the lack of evidence and the racial undertones of the case. Civil rights organizations, particularly the NAACP, began to intervene, providing legal assistance. The jury returned, with a verdict 2 days later. They hesitated for a long time. It was known that 2 jurors had initially voted for a guilty verdict, but ultimately changed their minds. The verdict, not guilty. There was silence in the courtroom. Then, tears, hugs, and relief. Aaliyah, who was present with a social worker, ran to her mother, and finally hugged her, after 3 months of separation. But this was not the end. For Letitia, it was just a step on a long road. A fight for the restoration of her reputation, getting her job back, regaining trust in people, and herself. An acquittal does not mean that justice prevailed, at least not entirely. For Letitia Gray, it was the beginning of a new challenge. After being released from custody, she had neither a job nor means of survival. In stores where she used to buy groceries, people looked at her suspiciously. Former friends avoided meeting, and neighbors whispered. Despite the acquittal, in the minds of some, she was already guilty. Letitia told journalists that after the trial, she lost trust, even in the simplest things. People in uniform. She would walk around police officers, feeling anxiety at the sound of a siren. She feared ending up in the middle of something she couldn't control. This fear was irrational, but very real. Psychologists called it the post-traumatic experience of injustice. However, there were those who believed in her all along. The attorney who took her case pro bono continued to support Letitia. After the verdict, she helped her reach out to human rights organizations to seek compensation for the wrongful detention. 6 months after her acquittal, Letitia received her first payment from the city. This didn't cover all her losses. She couldn't pay off the car loan they took from her, or the back rent, but it allowed her to get back on her feet and start over. She moved to a new city, Macon, where no one knew her, and began a new life. Alongside the changes in her personal life, Letitia's case became a catalyst for discussions in society. Her story appeared in the documentary film, Black and Accused, which focused on cases where African Americans became victims of the justice system due to racial prejudice. The film also spoke about Letitia as an example of silent injustice, when even exoneration cannot restore a person's dignity. Renowned civil rights attorney Ben Crump commented on the case, saying, "What happened to Letitia is not an isolated case. It is a symptom of a disease that the United States has not yet cured. We still have a system where skin color influences the verdict more than the evidence." These words resonated with many. Activists began demanding reforms in local law enforcement agencies, more transparency in court proceedings, mandatory video surveillance of all police actions, and training on racial biases. In the town of Jacksonville, where the entire story unfolded, local authorities organized public hearings. People came and shared their own stories. It turned out that many African American residents had similar experiences, being stopped, searched without reason, or suspected solely because of their appearance. Letitia's case also began to be used in schools as part of civic education courses. Her story became an example of a systemic challenge, a lesson for those who still believe that justice was always fair. Young people discussed how to recognize discrimination, how to respond to prejudice, and what to do when witnessing injustice. For Letitia, life would never be the same again. She started volunteering for an organization that helps women who have been victims of judicial errors. She spoke at conferences, telling her story not for sympathy, but so that someone else wouldn't end up in her place. Her daughter, Aaliyah, also changed. She grew up faster than she should have. When her mother came back, Aaliyah would fall asleep every night holding her hand, as if her mother might disappear again. But over time, the smile returned. They visited a psychologist together, talked a lot, and slowly returned to normal life. The real vindication for Letitia didn't come from the court but from time, from the people who supported her, from the fact that she didn't break, and didn't allow hatred to consume her. Letitia Gray's story is not just a case of judicial error, it's a story about how easily one system can turn a person into an accused simply because of how they look, about how a society that sees itself as just sometimes betrays its own principles. A story of pain, struggle, and the importance of not staying silent. What happened in Georgia in 2012 is a lesson, but have we learned it? Most of us don't think about how quickly life can change. One call, one biased police officer, one prosecutor who doesn't care whether there's evidence. One day, and you're taken from home, from your family, without a chance to explain that you're innocent. Then months, years of struggle, humiliation, fear, and uncertainty. This is the reality for many, but the scariest part is that some never get out of it. This is not just an American problem, it is a human problem. Stereotypes, prejudices, indifference to details, all of this breeds disasters. How a society treats its most vulnerable members is a reflection of its maturity. And in this story, we see that maturity is still far off. Letitia didn't want to become a symbol, she just wanted to live a normal life. But it is precisely these people, ordinary women touched by injustice, not politicians or thought leaders, that change the consciousness of society. Letitia's story is one of pain, but also of strength. She didn't let herself be destroyed. She didn't grow bitter, didn't run away from society. Instead, she decided to take action. Her volunteering, her openness, and her desire to help others are true courage. The viewer who hears this story today may ask themselves, what can I do? And the answer is simple. Don't remain indifferent. When you see injustice, speak out. When you hear a stereotype, don't stay silent. When you can support, support. You don't have to be a hero to be a human. We cannot change Letitia's past, but we can make it so that there are fewer stories like hers, so that the police serve the people, not act against them, so that courts seek the truth, not convenient decisions, so that skin color stops being a verdict. Perhaps, thanks to stories like this, we can build a society where justice is not just a word from a textbook, but a reality. A society where every child, like Elia, will know that her mother is not the accused, but a heroine. Letitia continues to live, and every day she lives is a quiet protest against injustice. She is proof that even after the darkest moments, there is a chance to bring light back, and maybe one day, she will walk into that store, where people looked at her with distrust, and see something new in their eyes. Not suspicion, but respect. The story continues, and only we decide what it will be like next.
Friday evening. In the air calm before the weekend. Soft streetlights reflecting on car windows like warm brushstrokes. Jason is heading home from work. He's 29, an engineer working on urban infrastructure projects. Tonight he stayed late finalizing blueprints for a new city bridge. A bit tired but satisfied. Jazz plays softly in the car. Coltrane echoes gently in the cabin, his saxophone blending with the flicker of streetlights outside the window. Jason loves these moments. They remind him that life can be quiet and beautiful. His hands rest on the wheel, elbows comfortably leaning on the sides. Gaze calm, he thinks about making tea with lemon when he gets home and watching an old movie. His cat, a gray old feline named Luna, is probably already asleep on his bed. He smiles, remembering how she always greets him at the door, silent but with big eyes full of reproach. Where have you been so long? Suddenly, a flash. In the rear-view mirror, red and blue flashing lights, a police car. Jason instinctively slows down, checks the speedometer, everything within the limit. No turn missed, signal used, seatbelt on, all proper. But the police car doesn't pass. It beeps. Orders him to pull over. A mild confusion turns to tension. Something heavy settles in his chest. He turns on the hazard lights and slowly steers the car to the shoulder. Hands stay on the wheel. Music off. Protocol. Breathe steady, he tells himself. It's okay. But he knows it may not be. He lowers the window. Seconds later, footsteps, flashlight in the face, sharp voice, registration, license. Why are you driving here? Jason hands over the documents, silently. He knows better than to argue. This isn't his first time in this neighborhood. But the officer looks at him like it's the first time he's ever seen him. Is this your car? A cold gaze sliding across his skin, his eyes, his license plate. Yes, officer. It's mine. Just got off work. Here are the papers. The officer says nothing, checks them, speaks into the radio. Another officer approaches from the other side, also watching. The car isn't fancy. An old Toyota, clean, neat, like Jason himself. But something doesn't sit right with them. And suddenly the comfort of the evening disappears. The jazz fades out. Headlights now feel cold, not warm. The city,
which just minutes ago felt so familiar, now feels distant, hostile. When Jason was a teenager, his mother handed him a guide. A real one printed, laminated. It was titled What to Do If the Police Stop You. It wasn't a joke or exaggeration. It was their family's survival insurance. It said, don't reach into your pocket. Always say yes, officer. Remember their names. Smile. Even if you're scared. And most importantly, stay alive. In some countries there are etiquette rules for meeting police. In Jason's family, those were the rules of survival. All he wanted was to get home. To be with his cat. To watch a movie, to forget the world. Now he's on the shoulder, under the scrutiny of suspicion, and the phrase already rings in his mind, one he's heard too many times. If I were white they wouldn't have stopped me. The light from the flashing beacons reflected in the rearview mirror flickering red and blue like the sirens weren't just warning but drilling straight into his mind. Jason felt his pulse begin to race. He turned off the engine and placed his hands on the steering wheel. His fingers clenched, even as he forced himself to appear calm. The officer approached the driver's side with a stern, almost weary face. Young, but already hardened by duty. He didn't greet Jason, just said license and registration. Do you know why I stopped you? No, officer. I don't. Jason replied calmly. His voice trembled slightly, but he held it together. The officer leaned closer. Speeding. You were going 65 in a 55 zone. That was a lie. Jason had just checked the speedometer. He was driving under the limit, but he said nothing. In a dispute with authority, the truth isn't always on your side. A second officer approached the passenger side, silent, just watching. He held a flashlight, scanning the interior. His gaze was cold, intent, predatory. Jason once saw a video that had seared itself into his memory. A man stopped by police in almost the exact same situation. An ordinary evening just like this. The driver responded politely, handed over documents, then was told to step out for a check. Minutes later, he was on the pavement, and his family learned what happened from the news. He had done nothing wrong. It changed nothing. In that video before he was grabbed, the man said something that broke Jason. My name is Marcus. I have 2 kids. I just want to get home. Please don't shoot. Jason repeated those words in his head like they were his own. Because tomorrow, it could be him. The officer examined the documents silently, then looked him in the eye. Do you live around here? Yes, on Pineview, half a mile from here. Coming from work? Yes, officer. What do you do? I'm an engineer at Stelwave Tech. Engineer? The officer echoed, doubt in his voice. And then the second cop's face twisted into a faint but unmistakable smile. Not friendly, condescending. The kind of smile reserved not for jokes, but for people one doesn't respect. Step out of the vehicle, the first officer said. Jason's heart clenched, but he did as told, slowly, deliberately, with his hands raised. His heartbeat pounded so loudly he imagined it echoing through the glass. It was cool outside. The asphalt beneath his feet felt foreign. Jason didn't feel like a person. He felt like a problem. A target. A character forced to prove his innocence just because his skin was dark. Mind if we search the vehicle? One of them asked. Jason knew he had the right to say no, but he also knew reality doesn't always follow the law. He nodded. One officer circled the car while the other remained beside him. Sometimes we find surprising things, the second one said casually. Even in an engineer's car. The words were venomous. Not insinuation. Contempt. And that was the worst part. When you're disrespected not for what you've done, but for simply existing. The search found nothing. The officer returned the documents. Sorry for the delay, sir, he said, but his voice held no sincerity. And they left. Just like that. No explanations. No warnings. No have a good night. Jason stood by the car for a few minutes, then slowly got in, started the engine and drove off. In the rearview mirror, an empty road, but inside an unrest that wouldn't settle anytime soon. He had done nothing wrong. But he still felt like a criminal, not because he broke the law, but because someone decided he might. After the arrest, which came as an unexpected blow not only to Jason but also to many witnesses of the event, the situation escalated beyond a mere street incident. What began as a routine check turned into a scene of public humiliation. The police officers, ignoring the growing number of onlookers, began to roughly search Jason right on the sidewalk, in front of his son, passers-by, and the smartphone cameras that were already focused on the situation. People started filming, shouting their outrage. Some even began to cry as they watched the man being humiliated without reason. His hands trembled as they were twisted behind his back, and his son was told, "Step away," despite pleading not to touch his dad. This was not a typical arrest. It was something deeper, a symbol of how the system often treats people based not on their actions, but on the color of their skin. An interesting fact: in many U.S. states, there have been recorded instances where police officers used what are known as pretextual stops, but stops without a clear reason, often simply due to suspicious behavior, which in practice meant that the driver was black. One study conducted by Stanford University found that police stop black drivers 2.5 times more often than white drivers, even though the rate of violations among the former is lower. The situation escalated when one of the officers uttered a phrase that cut through the crowd like a thunderclap. "We don't want trouble from people like you." This remark became the spark. Everyone understood it wasn't about the law, it wasn't about safety, it was about prejudice. On social media, this moment would soon go viral, sparking a wave of anger, outrage, and pain. Jason remained silent. He didn't shout, didn't resist, didn't provoke. He only looked at his son and tried not to show fear, but deep inside he was overwhelmed with despair. He knew that even when this situation was over, its shadow would remain with them both forever. While he was being held, 2 more patrol cars arrived. It looked like something extraordinary, even though there was no reason for it. The situation snowballed. People filmed, posted videos on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. Videos with captions like "This is how the police behave in 2025" quickly gained thousands of views in just a few hours. Almost instantly, the situation turned into a national news story. But for Marcus, it wasn't a story, it was his reality. And this reality showed him that while he thought he was living in a world moving forward, in many ways, everything had remained the same as it was 50 years ago. The irony was that the next day, he was supposed to speak at the university about the importance of being a leader in the community, and here he was humiliated, for no reason, in front of his son. How could he now talk about hope, when such lawlessness was right in front of him? He was released a few hours later, without any explanation or apology, but the emotional damage had already been done. Of course, the case didn't end there. The video had gone viral. Lawyers reached out. Human rights activists were preparing press conferences. But for Jason, it was different. He wasn't looking for revenge. He wanted answers. And he wanted his son to know, even when you are humiliated, it's not your fault. He didn't know if it was possible to explain to his child why his dad was searched when he had done nothing wrong. But he decided he wouldn't stay silent. If this experience could help shift something in the system, he would do everything to make sure it was heard. After being released from the station, Jason walked home silently. His legs felt heavy, as if made of concrete. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, but the hum of voices, the flashing of sirens, and the bitterness lingered in the air. He never thought that on this very day, an ordinary day, his life would change so dramatically. In his mind, moments replayed: the face of the police officer, his son's trembling fingers, the cold handcuffs. Jason felt not just humiliated, his human dignity had been trampled. When he got home, his wife met him, worried, tearful. She had already seen the video. The first words she spoke weren't a question, "What happened?" but a statement, "You're alive." And that's the most important thing. But Jason knew that something had died inside him, and even more frightening, something had broken in their son's eyes. A boy who was only 10, he had seen his father as a hero, and now he would have to see a man who had been humiliated for no reason. The following days became a psychological trial. Jason couldn't concentrate on work. His phone was ringing off the hook with calls from journalists, activists, and lawyers. Everyone wanted to know something, to take an interview, to use his story. He became a symbol, but not because he wanted to, but because the system had once again shown its true face. Despite the exhaustion, Jason decided not to hide. 3 days later, he appeared at the city council's public hearings. He held the microphone in his hands, like a weapon. His voice trembled, but he spoke, not out of anger, but out of pain. About his son, about not wanting another child to see their father dragged across the asphalt just because of the color of their skin. After his speech, the city began to boil. Students organized a protest. Artists created murals with Jason's face. His name became a hashtag on social media. But most importantly, people began to talk about systemic injustice, not as an abstract problem, but as a personal drama. His story became an illustration of how anyone could become a victim, even if they hadn't done anything wrong. However, this didn't bring Jason any relief. At night, he would wake up from dreams where sirens screamed in his ears, and his hands couldn't rise because they were held by handcuffs. His son became silent, withdrawn. He no longer asked when they would go to baseball or the park. His childhood world had cracked, and Jason saw that. A week later, Jason was invited to a talk show. He hesitated for a long time, but went. He was given 5 minutes of airtime, but he said everything he wanted. "I don't want my story to be remembered just because of the video. I want it to be remembered for the changes that will follow." His words spread like a shot. The next day, the mayor of the city announced a review of the detention policy. Human rights lessons were introduced in schools. The police officer who stopped Jason was temporarily suspended. For many it was a victory, but for Jason it was only the beginning of a new reality. Life after trauma, a life in which his face had become public. He didn't want to be a hero, he just wanted to be a father, a man, a human being. But now he had a mission he didn't choose, to make the world see what had long been ignored. Jason increasingly spoke at community meetings, schools, and human rights forums. His story, which had initially been a shock and tragedy, began to serve as the voice of hundreds of others who didn't have the ability or courage to speak. And although he felt exhaustion, the responsibility to those who listened fueled his strength. One evening, he received a letter from a 17-year-old boy from another state. The boy wrote, "I've been stopped by police 3 times in the last 2 months. The first time I was scared, the second time I was angry, and the third time I just wanted to run. But then I saw your video. You showed that we can speak up and that we are not alone. Thank you, brother. I stand with you." Jason read the letter 5 times. He didn't know the boy, but it was as though he could see him before him, beaten, scared, but alive, and now, no longer silent. 2 weeks later, Jason was invited to Washington to speak at a conference on racial equality. It was a level that seemed unreal to him. In the hall sat hundreds, politicians, activists, artists. Jason had no speeches prepared by speechwriters. He simply spoke his truth. "I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a leader of a movement. I'm a father who was humiliated in front of his son, and if this happened to me, it can happen to any one of you." He looked at the hall. Some nodded, some clenched their lips, but most importantly, everyone was listening. From this silence, attention was born, and from that change. After the conference,
Several public organizations offered Jason support: legal, financial, psychological. One of them, a center supporting victims of police brutality, asked him to become their regional representative. It wasn't a career he had dreamed of, but it was a mission that made sense. Yet, despite the success, recognition, and support, there were also other reactions. Jason received threats. He was sent anonymous letters calling him a liar, a provocateur. Once, someone scratched "deserved it" on the hood of his car. It hurt, not so much physically, as emotionally. Society was not united in its reaction. For many, it was easier to blame the victim than to see the truth. But Jason didn't back down. He began writing a blog, where he published the stories of others, ordinary black men and women who faced discrimination. One of the most widely publicized cases he highlighted was that of a man who was detained simply for walking too slowly. The surveillance footage that Jason helped distribute gathered over 3 million views, and this time, the public reacted immediately. What was truly surprising was the support he started receiving from unexpected people. A former police officer contacted him and said, "I wore the uniform for 15 years. I disagree with how you were stopped. It was a betrayal of the very idea of service. I am no longer on the side of silence." These were moments when Jason understood change doesn't begin with revolutions, but with the inner decisions of individuals. And although the media began calling him a symbol of resistance, he remained himself. A father who made his son breakfast every morning. A man who sometimes woke up in the night from the same dream. Cold handcuffs, the flash of a flashlight in his face, a heart pounding in his chest. But now he knew. His fear no longer had power over him. Jason began writing a book, not a memoir, not a political work, but a letter to his son. On the first pages he wrote, "Son, I want you to live in a world where your name is not grounds for suspicion, and I will do everything I can to bring this world closer to you." One day, which began as an ordinary one, Jason was out with his son to buy groceries. Everything suddenly changed. There was a small crowd by the supermarket, and a police car with flashing lights. Something had happened. People were filming on their phones, discussing. Jason didn't want to get involved at first. He didn't want to link every day to a fight anymore. But when he heard the screams, children's screams, something inside him shifted. On the asphalt sat a teenager, black, about 14 years old. Two officers held his hands behind his back, and even though the boy wasn't resisting, one of them was pressing down on his shoulder with such force that there was no doubt. This wasn't restraint, this was a show of power. The boy's mother was screaming, begging them to let him go, but the officer told her to stay away, or you'll be arrested. What did he do? Jason asked loudly, stepping closer. The officer didn't answer immediately. Only after a brief pause. He was suspected of theft. He ran with a bag in his hands. Fits the description. And the bag? Jason asked, pointing to the transparent packet of chips lying nearby. Not your business, citizen. Jason was already taking out his phone. The same anxiety he had felt during his own stop woke up in him again. But this time he wasn't alone. His story had already influenced many. And this time the crowd didn't stay silent. "Are you kidding again?" Someone from the crowd shouted. "We know Jason. We know what suspicion based on color means." The officers seemed confused. One of them, the younger one, took a step back. The officer holding the teenager started talking into the radio, calling for backup. But it was already too late. The situation was rapidly turning into yet another case. And it no longer belonged only to the police. It belonged to the people who were filming it. More officers arrived, but the crowd kept growing, and all they did was form a circle, not intervening. One officer, a woman in her 40s, approached Jason. "Are you Jason Mitchell?" "Yes, I saw your video. Let me talk to him." She walked over to the teenager, asked the officer to release his hands. "We'll talk to him differently," she said. He reluctantly agreed. The boy was sobbing, his mother trembling nearby. Everyone was waiting. For what? An admission, an apology, or justice? The officer extended her hand to the boy. "What's your name?" "Jamal." "Jamal. Jamal. You're not being accused of anything. We'll sort it out." "Okay." He nodded. His eyes were scared. But Jason was standing next to him, and the boy knew he wasn't alone. Everything ended without arrests. The cameras kept filming. Later, the video garnered more than 10 million views. But most importantly, it was a moment when one person's voice protected another. It was a moment when silence didn't win. After that incident, Jason was invited more and more often to appear on shows, round tables, even to the police. For training sessions, he spoke about situations where it wasn't weapons, orders, but conversation that made the difference. Empathy. In one of his talks, he said, "I'm not against the police, I'm against police indifference, because the uniform isn't a privilege, it's a responsibility, and if you forget that, you're dangerous." Several months had passed since the incident with Jamal, and although for some it was just another story in the newsfeed, for Jason, it was a turning point. He no longer viewed his stop as a personal trauma. Now, he saw how his experience had become protection for others, and this thought no longer allowed him to remain on the sidelines. One morning, he woke up with a new sense. This wasn't the end, it was just the beginning of a new path. He no longer cared who supported him, and who didn't. He knew that words had power. His story had become part of a larger movement, a movement of people who were tired of staying silent. Jason started holding weekly meetings at the community center. Black parents, children, police officers, social workers. The stories shared at these meetings left no one indifferent. For the first time, he saw officers listen not as authorities, but as people. One evening, the officer who had held Jamal that day approached him. "I watched the video. I was wrong. You opened my eyes." These were not empty words. This officer, just a few weeks later, stopped another teenager, and instead of aggression, simply talked. Cameras caught that too. This time, as an example of change, Jason also began working with youth. In schools and colleges, he was invited to TEDx, forums, even to the police academy. Every time, he told the same story, about the stop, the pain, the fear, the voice that could have disappeared but didn't. But what inspired him the most were the children. One time, after a speech at a school, a little girl came up to him. "My mom was once told that we are nobody, but you proved that we are important." These words shattered Jason's heart. They reminded him why he hadn't broken. He knew the fight was far from over, but now, it had faces, stories, lives. These were no longer slogans or theories. This was the truth, and no one could ignore it anymore. One evening, he sat at home, flipping through his old journal. It contained entries about that day, the very same day when he simply wanted to go to work, but the police stop changed everything. He smiled. If someone had told him back then that this would become the start of a mission, he wouldn't have believed it. But now, he believed, because one voice is enough to start change. Sometimes you don't have to be loud to be heard, you just have to be real. And Jason proved that.